A pit bull bolts into traffic. Cars screech. Horns blare. But he doesn't flinch. He throws himself down in front of a storm drain, guarding it like something sacred lies beneath. People shout. Some swerve around him. No one stops. Until one man does. Welcome to Vale Marks, where stories aren't just told, they're felt. What drove this dog to risk everything for a hole in the street? And what secret was he protecting beneath the grate? This isn't just a story. It's a message wrapped in loyalty, loss, and love. Watch until the end. The truth will break your heart and mend it in the most unexpected way. It wasn't barking. It wasn't growling. It just stared at me with the eyes of something that had already lost half its soul. I was running late for work, coffee still warm in the cup holder, when I slammed on the brakes. Right in the middle of the narrow downtown street, blocking traffic like a statue of sorrow, lay a large pit bull, gray and white, broad-shouldered, but still a stone. Not injured, not aggressive, just still, right in front of a storm drain. At first, I thought maybe it was a stray, maybe confused, maybe even hurt. But as cars swerved to avoid it, some honking, others cursing, no one stopped. No one even slowed. Just another dog on another street, in another city. But I couldn't drive past. I don't know why I turned the car around. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the way it wasn't panicking, wasn't scared. It was the way it looked down into that metal grate, like its whole world had fallen in and never come back up. I parked half on the curb, flipped on my hazard lights, and stepped into the chilly morning air. The sky still held that soft pre-dawn glow, and the city was just beginning to stir. Horns in the distance. Buses. A garbage truck, clanking far off. But here, on this side street, everything was quiet except for the soft wind and the soft breath of that dog. As I approached, the pit bull didn't move. Not an inch. It turned its head slowly toward me, just once, long enough for our eyes to meet. And that was all it took. That look, it didn't say help me. It said something deeper. Something heavier. It said, this is where I belong, because this is where I lost everything. I crouched a few feet away, unsure if it would snap or growl, but it didn't. It barely even blinked. It simply turned its head back down to the grate and let out the quietest, saddest sigh I'd ever heard come from a living creature. Hey there, buddy, I said softly. What are you doing out here? No response. No movement. Just the same statue, still focus. I looked around. No collar. No leash. But this wasn't a street dog. Its coat was clean, nails trimmed, body strong. Someone had taken care of this dog. Until they hadn't, I took a slow step forward. Then another. I crouched beside the storm drain and looked down into the darkness. It was too deep to see anything clearly. Just shadows and the echo of dripping water. Nothing else. Whatever the dog was waiting for, if it had been there, it wasn't now. Still, the pit bull remained shoulders square, head low, ears perked but motionless. The name Shadow popped into my head for no reason at all. Maybe it was the way the morning light broke around his body. Maybe it was because he looked like he belonged to the shadows more than the living. I didn't know then how accurate that name would become. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out a half-eaten granola bar. I unwrapped it slowly, careful not to make sudden movements. I held it out, not too close. To my surprise, the dog sniffed. He shifted slightly, crawled forward a few inches, and took the piece gently from my hand. He chewed slowly, politely, then, without hesitation, turned right back to the drain. What's down there? I asked, more to myself than to him. Nothing. Just silence. I sat with him a while. Minutes passed. People walked by, glanced once, and kept going. One jogger slowed down just enough to shake his head. Must be guarding something, he muttered before continuing on. But this didn't feel like guarding. It felt like mourning. Eventually, I had to leave. Work was calling. Life doesn't pause just because your heart gets snagged on something unexpected. But as I walked away, I kept looking over my shoulder. That dog never moved. I came back the next morning, and the next, and the next. He was always there, rain or shine, day or night, eyes locked on that same spot. And that's when it hit me. He wasn't watching over something. He was waiting for something or someone that wasn't coming back. There's a kind of heartbreak that doesn't scream. It doesn't flail or lash out. It just waits. Quiet, faithful. And that's what I saw in him, a heartbreak too deep for noise. Over the days that followed, I brought food. A blanket. A bowl of water. Sometimes he accepted them. Sometimes he didn't. But he never left that spot. Not even once. And with each visit I felt it more. This wasn't just a dog. This was the beginning of a story. A story I hadn't asked to be part of, but couldn't walk away from either. I didn't know then what was waiting for me in the days ahead. I didn't know that behind those quiet eyes was a tale of loss, love, and one final act of hope. I only knew one thing, that I had just stepped into the saddest story I would ever hear. And maybe, just maybe, the most beautiful. The next few mornings, I kept returning to the same spot. Something about that dog, about Shadow, as I'd started calling him, wouldn't let me go. He was always there, in the same position, head down, eyes focused on the storm drain like it held the secret to a world only he remembered. I brought food, fresh water, even a soft towel to lie on. He accepted them silently, always polite, but never interested in anything more than that. Steel grate beneath his paws. On the third morning, as I knelt beside him, with a fresh bowl of water, a soft voice behind me broke the stillness. He's been waiting for her. I turned to see a woman in her late 70s, wrapped in a long gray cardigan, holding a cup of tea in one hand and an old paperback in the other. Her voice was gentle, but her eyes held the weight of someone who had watched this story unfold from the beginning. "I'm sorry?" I asked. She gave me a kind smile and motioned to the shop behind her. "Walker's Books. That's mine. I've watched that dog sit there every day, morning till night. Never moves unless it's to eat. Rain, wind, heat, nothing drives him away." I stood, brushing dirt from my jeans. "Do you know him?" She nodded, eyes misting slightly. "His name is Shadow, and he belongs to Lily." "Lily?" I echoed, as if speaking the name might pull the story forward. "The woman, Mrs." Walker stepped closer, her gaze drifting to the dog. Lily was a sweet girl, early 20s, medical student, rented a small apartment just down the block, above the flower shop. She used to come by every afternoon, always with Shadow. He'd sit right outside my window while she picked out used books. Sometimes she'd read poetry aloud to him right on the bench. A smile crept onto her face for just a second before fading. He was her Shadow. "That's what she called him," said he, never left her side. And he really didn't. I looked back at the dog still lying there. The name fit so well, it almost hurt. "They were inseparable," she continued. "You couldn't see one without the other. The kids in the neighborhood loved them, especially Shadow. He'd roll over, let them tug on his ears, even share their ice cream if they let him. Every single afternoon, they'd pass right by here, always laughing, always together. There was a pause then, the kind of silence that felt heavy, like the air itself was grieving. And then one day, she said softly, "Only he came back." I swallowed hard. "What happened, Mrs.?" Walker wrapped both hands around her cup, as though drawing warmth from it might soften the memory. "It was about a week ago. There'd been a heavy rain that morning. The drains were flooding. I was closing early because of it. That's when I heard the sirens." She took a breath, steadying herself. "I found out later, from one of the neighbors, that a little boy had wandered too close to the edge of the sidewalk. The grate was loose. He slipped in, got stuck down there. People were screaming, but no one could reach him." Her voice cracked then, just slightly. "Lily was passing by with Shadow, and she didn't even hesitate." The breath caught in my throat. I could feel where this was going, but I didn't want it to be true. She climbed down into the drain to reach him, one of the narrower maintenance tunnels. She managed to calm him, even got his leg untangled. But before she could pull them both up, the water started rushing in. Fast. And strong. Mrs. Walker's eyes glistened. Emergency crews arrived. They pulled the boy out. "He survived, and Lily?" I asked, barely above a whisper. Her eyes drifted down to Shadow. "She didn't make it. They said she was trapped between two rusted support beams. There wasn't enough time, Silence settled between us like dust. The kind of silence that doesn't ask to be broken. He saw everything, she added. Shadow. He was barking, panicking. And after it was over, he came back here, right to this spot. And he hasn't left since. I felt a tightness in my chest. That kind of ache that sneaks up on you when you least expect it. Shadow wasn't just sitting at a drain. He was guarding the last place he ever saw the person he loved most in the world. He's been here every day? I asked. Mrs. Walker nodded slowly. Every day. He barely eats, doesn't play, just waits, and no one took him in. Oh, people tried. Animal services came once. A young couple brought a leash and treats. He just howled when they pulled him away. Escaped the next morning. Always finds his way back here. I glanced back at Shadow, lying there with the patience of someone who believed the impossible might still happen. It wasn't just loyalty. It was grief. He's still waiting for her, Mrs. Walker whispered. And suddenly, I understood. This wasn't a dog who needed a home. This was a soul who had lost one. A few days after learning the truth about Lily's fate, I couldn't stop thinking about her or about the kind of person she must have been. What kind of soul throws themselves into a storm drain to save a stranger's child? The kind that doesn't think twice. The kind that loved bigger than fear. I felt like I needed to know her. Not just what happened to her, but who she really was. So I started asking around, talking to neighbors, shopkeepers, even college students from the nearby university. That's how I eventually found Ava. She was sitting at an outdoor cafe, typing on her laptop with earbuds in. Her red hair was tied in a loose knot, and her face carried that kind of gentle seriousness that told me she didn't laugh easily, but when she did, it was honest. When I introduced myself and mentioned Shadow, her eyes softened instantly. "You've met him," she said quietly, closing her laptop. I wondered who'd finally get through. I nodded, trying not to let the emotion in my chest choke my voice. He's still waiting for her. Ava looked down, biting her lower lip. Yeah, that sounds like him. She motioned for me to sit. And over the next hour, she painted a portrait of Lily that made me feel like I'd known her for years. Lily wasn't supposed to have a dog, Ava said with a half smile. Her landlord didn't allow pets, and she barely had time for herself between clinical rotations and exams. But Shadow wasn't something she planned. He just happened. She leaned back, looking up as if she could see the memory playing out in the sky. It was raining that day too. I remember because my umbrella flipped inside out, and I was swearing like crazy at the wind. Lily was supposed to meet me for lunch, but she was late, which wasn't like her. When she finally showed up, she was soaked, covered in dirt, and carrying a bleeding Pitbull in her arms. I blinked. She just picked him up from the side of the road, Ava nodded. He'd been hit by a scooter, left limping near the intersection. People walked past. One guy took a picture. Lily didn't hesitate. She took off her jacket, wrapped him up, and carried him 6 blocks to the vet. She chuckled softly. She was furious when they told her the shelter might have to put him down if no one claimed him. So, she claimed him. That was the day everything changed. Lily didn't just save Shadow, he became part of her world. Her schedule shifted. Her routine adjusted. And somehow, despite the chaos of student life, she always found time for him. She used to call him Hope on 4 legs, as Ava said. That's what her blog was named. I raised an eyebrow. She had a blog. Ava smiled. Oh yeah. She wrote these beautiful, reflective pieces sometimes about medicine, sometimes about grief, sometimes about dogs, but always about love. She'd post pictures of Shadow walking beside her, watching her study, waiting outside the campus library. She said he reminded her that no matter how messy life got, there was always a reason to believe in something good. That hit me hard, because I'd seen that Hope myself, quiet and patient, lying beside a storm drain, believing that love could return if he just waited long enough. She had a tough childhood, Ava added after a pause. Bounced between relatives. Lost her parents young. She didn't talk about it much, but you could feel it in the way she held on to the people she loved. She held on tightly. And Shadow? He wasn't just a pet. He was the one thing she could hold on to without fear of losing again. Ava showed me photos on her phone. Lily laughing as Shadow licked her chin. Both of them sprawled out on a blanket in the park, Lily asleep with her head resting against his side. They were inseparable, but there was more to it than companionship. Lily had plans, big ones. She wanted to open a rescue center, Ava said. Not some massive operation. Just a place where dogs like Shadow, wounded, overlooked, could be safe. She had the name picked out and everything. What was it? I asked. Second chances, she replied, because that's what she believed everyone deserved. Dogs, people, all of us. A second chance to be loved right. We sat in silence for a moment, listening to the sounds of the city moving around us. Horns, footsteps, distant laughter, but all I could hear was the quiet grief and radiant kindness of a girl I'd never met, whose life had quietly transformed so many others, starting with a stray pitbull on a rainy afternoon. She changed him, I said aloud. Ava nodded. And he changed her. I think she needed him just as much as he needed her. I thanked Ava for her time, and as I stood to leave, she touched my arm gently. He's still holding on, isn't he? He is, I said. But he's tired. You can see it in the way he lays there. She looked away, blinking fast. Then maybe it's time someone helped him let go. As I walked back toward that storm drain where Shadow still waited, I couldn't stop thinking about Lily's dream, her strength, her love, and the echo of it that remained in the dog she left behind. Some bonds are forged in crisis, others in kindness. But the strongest ones? They're built in both. And Shadow, he was living proof. Shadow came home with me on a quiet Thursday afternoon. It wasn't a decision I planned. There was no dramatic rescue, no tug-of-war with animal control. It was simpler than that. I sat beside him by the storm drain, same as I had for the past few mornings, and asked softly, "You want to come with me for a while?" He didn't bark, didn't move at first. But when I stood and began to walk away, he rose slowly to his feet and followed, his steps heavy, hesitant, but willing. He didn't need a leash. He just stayed close, quiet, obedient, distant. I opened the passenger side door of my old Jeep and watched him climb in. He curled up on the seat like he'd done it 100 times, and I suddenly realized that even the act of riding in a car was something he remembered, something he used to do with her. At home, I set up a cozy spot in the corner of the living room, soft blankets, a bowl of water, and a squeaky toy I'd picked up from the pet store. But Shadow didn't care for any of it. He didn't sniff around. He didn't explore. He simply walked to the front door, sat down facing it, and stared. For hours. I tried calling his name. He didn't react. I brought over food. He ignored it. Later that night, as I sat on the couch with a cup of tea, I glanced over and found him still in the exact same position, motionless, eyes locked on the door as if expecting it to open at any moment. And then it hit me. He wasn't looking for comfort. He was waiting for Lily. He didn't need a new home. He needed his home, the one that existed only when she was beside him. He wasn't here to move on. He was here because he didn't know what else to do. I'd seen that look before, on my own face. Years ago, my wife, Emily, had died after a long battle with cancer. She was the kind of woman who filled a room with life just by stepping into it. After she passed, I used to sit in the hallway near our bedroom, listening foolishly, hoping to hear her humming as she brushed her hair, or the sound of her slippers scuffing the hardwood floor. That ache, that phantom hope, it lived in Shadow's eyes too. We were two strangers in the same house, both haunted by absences we couldn't fix. The next few days settled into a strange rhythm. I'd get up early, fix breakfast, feed him, though most days he barely touched his food, and then we'd go for a walk. Not far, just around the block and back. He never pulled, never strayed. He simply followed, like he was on autopilot. He didn't bark. He didn't play. He barely slept, but he always sat at the door. I tried everything. I bought treats, left the TV on, even found a playlist called Calming Dog Music. Still, his eyes remained fixed on that entryway. It was like he was afraid to blink, in case she walked through it. One evening, I sat down beside him on the floor, cross-legged, unsure if he'd even acknowledge me. I didn't touch him. I didn't speak at first. I just sat with him in silence, letting the weight of the room settle around us. Then I said quietly, I lost someone too, you know. Shadow didn't move, but something in his breathing shifted barely, but enough. My wife. Her name was Emily. She used to make tea every night, even in summer. Said it was good for the soul. I hated tea, but I drank it anyway, just to sit next to her. I paused, staring down at my hands. I still make tea, I whispered, even though she's not here. I guess we all hold on to something. For the first time, Shadow turned his head slightly in my direction. Just a glance. Just a flicker. But it was the first connection I'd felt from him since the day he left that storm drain. After that night, things didn't change overnight. But they did start to shift quietly, gently. He began eating a little more. He followed me from room to room, not because he was curious, but because he didn't want to be alone. When I'd sit on the porch, he'd rest his head on my foot. When I went to bed, he lay just outside the door, still distant, still grieving but not alone anymore. One morning, I left the front door open while I took out the trash. When I came back inside, Shadow wasn't sitting by the door. He was lying by the window instead, sunlight streaming across his face, his breathing slow and calm. That was the first time I saw him rest. Maybe it was the quiet. Maybe it was the tea. Maybe it was just two broken hearts recognizing each other. But slowly, in the quiet spaces between grief and routine, we found something resembling peace. He wasn't mine. Not really. But we were two souls, carrying the same wound, and in that shared silence, we began to heal. It started with a wind that wouldn't stop. That night, the sky above the city trembled with distant thunder. The streetlights flickered like nervous fireflies, and the wind whipped through the narrow alley behind my house, rattling trash cans and bending branches low against the pavement. It had the kind of weighty silence that comes before something important, like the air was holding its breath. I was in the kitchen, making tea, my nightly ritual since Emily passed. Shadow was lying near the front door, as he often did, chin resting on his paws, eyes open but distant. He hadn't paced or whined in days. He'd grown quiet, softer. It made me believe, maybe foolishly, that he was healing. But something changed that night. A gust of wind slammed into the side of the house, hard enough to make the windows tremble. I barely flinched, but Shadow shot to his feet like a bolt of electricity. His ears perked. He let out a low, urgent growl, deep and rumbling, like it came from the part of him that still lived in fear or memory. Before I could speak, he was at the window, paws pressed against the sill, staring out into the storm. "Shadow?" I asked, setting the mug down. He turned to me for the briefest second, then ran to the front door and let out a sharp bark. Not aggressive, not fearful, but something between a command and a plea. "What is it, boy?" Then he pawed at the door, clawed at it. He wasn't just upset. He wanted out. I pulled on my coat and boots, grabbed the flashlight near the umbrella stand, and opened the door. He didn't wait. Shadow tore out into the wind-blown night, his powerful legs carrying him down the sidewalk with more urgency than I'd ever seen. I shouted after him, heart hammering, then ran. I didn't stop to lock the door. I didn't even turn off the porch light. He led me down the block, past the grocery store, past Mrs. Walker's quiet bookstore with its lights dimmed, past the playground where he used to sit beside Lily while she watched the kids play. And then he stopped, right in front of the storm drain, the same one where I'd first found him, the one I thought he'd finally let go of. He stood still, tail stiff, body tense. He began to circle the grate, nose low to the ground, growling again low and steady. Then he barked. Once, twice, a sharp, urgent sound that echoed down the empty street. I approached cautiously, the flashlight beam shaking slightly in my hand. The rain had started now, just a drizzle, but the wind made it feel colder than it was. The metal grate glistened with moisture, casting a faint reflection of Shadow's frame over the dark mouth of the drain. That's when I heard it. A sound I almost missed. Faint. A whimper. A tiny, broken sound, like something was crying, far below the surface. I froze. "Did you hear that?" I asked, though no one was around but Shadow, and he was already responding. His head jerked toward the noise. He growled, barked again, then looked at me, eyes wide, tail twitching anxiously. Something was down there. I dropped to my knees and pressed my ear to the cold steel of the grate. There it was again, a soft whine, alive, panicked, small. "I need help," I muttered, fumbling for my phone. With fingers damp from the rain, I called the city's emergency animal rescue line and explained the situation. To their credit, they didn't waste time. Within 15 minutes, the sound of sirens split the stillness. A fire truck pulled up, its lights painting red and white streaks across the buildings. Shadow paced nervously as the responders arrived, barking with growing urgency, as though he could explain the whole story if they'd just listen. The crew didn't need much convincing. I pointed to the grate. One firefighter knelt, listened, and immediately called for backup. They began prying the heavy steel cover loose, with crowbars and gloved hands. Shadow backed away, tail low, but stayed close enough to see. He never took his eyes off the opening. After what felt like hours, but was probably just minutes, the grate was lifted free, revealing the slick, narrow tunnel beneath. A flashlight was lowered into the darkness. "There," one firefighter said, voice tense but hopeful. "I see something." Another man, strapped into a harness, descended slowly. The wind howled again. Then, from the depths of the drain came a muffled shout. "Got it?" Moments later, the firefighter emerged, cradling a tiny, soaked bundle in his arms. It was a puppy, small, fragile, maybe 5 or 6 weeks old. Its fur, though matted and wet, was a distinct silver gray, so much like Shadow's it made my breath catch. Shadow took a step forward, ears alert, body trembling. He let out a single, soft bark, a questioning one. The puppy whimpered in response. The entire crew paused. The moment hung there between us. No one spoke. The fire chief looked at me, his voice gentle. "Is he yours?" I nodded. "His name's Shadow. He's the one who led me here." The chief looked at Shadow, then the pup. Well, if he hadn't, this little one wouldn't have lasted much longer down there. Shadow crept forward, eyes locked on the puppy, and gently nudged the damp fur with his nose. The pup responded with a faint, grateful yip. Something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. Or just a shared sense of survival. I looked down at both of them, one broken, one barely whole, and felt a warmth spread through the cold. The storm raged above us. But in that moment, standing on the wet pavement beneath the city's flickering lights, there was only peace and a quiet miracle pulled from the shadows. The little gray puppy was wrapped gently in a thick towel by one of the firefighters, his small body shivering from the cold and shock. His eyes, wide and unsure, darted around at the crowd gathered on the rainy street, the truck's flashing lights casting surreal shadows across the sidewalk. Despite his fragile appearance, there was something determined in the way he lifted his head, as if he'd already survived something greater than his size could explain. The vet, who had arrived just minutes earlier, leaned in to examine him beneath the towel. She checked his heartbeat, his pause, and gently cleaned the grime off his face. As she wiped around his neck, her hands paused. "Wait," she murmured. "There's something tied around his neck." She carefully loosened the small knot and pulled out what looked like a torn piece of fabric faded lavender in color, soft like an old blanket. It was dirty, soaked, and frayed at the ends, but unmistakably intentional. Michael stepped forward slowly, his eyes narrowing as he got a closer look. For a moment, he didn't breathe. "That," he whispered, voice catching. "That belonged to Lily." Everyone turned toward him. He reached out, taking the damp cloth gently from the vet's hand. His thumb ran across its corner, where a tiny embroidered flower was still barely visible through the dirt. "She used this blanket for Shadow," he said quietly. "The day she found him, she tore off a piece and tied it around his neck. Said it was for comfort. Said no one should be alone without something soft." He swallowed hard. She never stopped trying to comfort someone. Even now, Shadow stood a few feet away, soaked from the rain, his powerful frame trembling not from fear, but from something deeper. His eyes were locked on the tiny puppy in the firefighter's arms. He didn't move, but his body leaned forward slightly, drawn to this fragile creature as if some invisible thread was pulling them together. Michael knelt beside him and whispered, "She sent him to you, didn't she, at that?" Shadow finally moved. He walked slowly, deliberately across the wet pavement, every step measured. When he reached the puppy, he lowered his head, gently sniffed the small bundle. The puppy tilted its head, unsure, then let out the tiniest whimper. And then, in a moment that felt like the whole world held its breath, Shadow did something no one had seen him do in weeks. He licked the puppy's head. It wasn't rushed or panicked. It was slow, tender, purposeful. As if in that single motion he was saying, "You're safe now. I've got you." Michael turned away for a moment, wiping a tear that slipped down his cheek before it could mix with the rain. "She's still saving lives," he whispered. Even from beyond the grave, he reached down, petting Shadow gently behind the ears. "You feel that, don't you, boy? You know she'd want you to protect him, to move forward. Not forget, but carry her love into something new." The vet finished her exam and nodded. "He's malnourished, dehydrated, but no broken bones. He's a fighter. He'll make it," someone in the small crowd asked. "What's his name?" Michael looked at Shadow, then at the puppy, then back to the piece of lavender cloth in his hand. "Echo," he said softly. "Echo?" the vet repeated, smiling. Michael nodded. "Because he's the echo of Lily's kindness. The echo of love that doesn't stop. Even when someone's gone," the name stuck immediately. Echo. Shadow sat beside the little pup as the vet packed up. Michael gathered them both and drove home in silence, the cab of the Jeep filled with the smell of rain and the quiet presence of something new, something healing. Back at the house, Michael laid out 2 soft towels by the fireplace, lit for warmth despite the season. He placed Echo gently on one towel, wrapping him loosely, and let Shadow settle on the other. He watched closely as Shadow lay down beside the puppy, not pressed against him, but near enough that Echo could feel his warmth. The puppy curled into the towel and let out a soft sigh, the kind of sound only a creature that knows safety makes. That night, for the first time, Shadow didn't sleep alone at the front door. He stayed beside Echo, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed, breathing in rhythm with a tiny heart now beating just inches from his own. Michael watched them for a long time from his armchair, tea cooling on the side table, and a book lying open but unread in his lap. He smiled softly. "You're not alone anymore, Shadow." And neither is he. In the days that followed, Echo began to recover quickly, and with an eagerness that made the house feel brighter. He learned to walk behind Shadow, mimicking his every move, bumping into furniture, tripping over rugs, but always getting back up. And Shadow watched him constantly, sometimes nosing him gently away from danger, other times letting the little pup climb onto his back and nap there like he was a moving blanket. It was beautiful to see the way loss had opened the door for something new, not as a replacement, but as a continuation, a next chapter. Michael took them both to the park one morning, and as they sat beneath the tall oak trees, he pulled out a notebook and wrote, "Grief never leaves us, but sometimes it brings with it a gift, a reason to keep going." Shadow lost Lily, but in finding Echo, he found a new purpose. And maybe, just maybe, that's how we honor the ones we've lost. By carrying their love into someone else's beginning, he closed the book and looked at the 2 dogs lying in the grass, their bodies nearly touching, breathing in the rhythm of something deeper than words. Love, loss, and the quiet miracle of starting again. Morning walks became a ritual for us. Michael, Shadow, and Echo, an unlikely trio, bound not by blood, but by something far stronger, love forged in grief, and healing born from loss. Each day, just after sunrise, the 3 of us would set out from the quiet little house on Maple Lane. Shadow walked with steady dignity, a little slower now, but still powerful, still present. Echo, on the other hand, bounded ahead, full of energy and mischief, circling back to nuzzle at Shadow's face or trot beside Michael like a furry shadow of his own. Their path always led them to the same place, a tall red maple in the corner of the neighborhood park, its leaves now starting to turn with the season. The tree stood watch over the grass like an old sentinel, and at its base was a small wooden bench. Nothing special at first glance, weathered, unpainted, but on the backrest was a simple metal plaque in memory of Lily Mae Turner, a healer, a heart, a light that never faded. Shadow used to stop there, not just to rest, but to feel, to remember. His eyes would drift to the sky, or maybe to some place Michael couldn't see. Echo didn't understand yet, but he always grew quiet near the tree, curling up by Shadow's side, as if he too felt the reverence in the air. Michael would sit on the bench, hands folded in his lap, and just breathe. Sometimes he would speak softly, as if Lily were listening, and maybe she was. The storm drain where it all began still sat in the sidewalk 3 blocks away, untouched. But Shadow no longer visited it. He didn't stare at it as they passed, didn't whimper or pull toward it like he used to. It had become just another part of the street. Not forgotten, but no longer a wound. In its place was something new, Echo. A little soul with a bright future, and the weight of someone else's love behind his eyes. He didn't replace Lily. No one could. But somehow, he carried forward the best parts of her, the gentleness, the courage, the instinct to care, to save. It was in the way Echo watched Shadow like a student watches a master. The way he curled against Michael's side on cold nights. The way he barked when the neighbor's toddler wandered too far into the street. He was small, but fierce. Soft, but brave. And day by day, Michael saw in him what Lily must have seen in Shadow all those years ago. News of the rescue spread faster than Michael ever expected. A passerby had snapped a photo the night of the storm, the moment Shadow stood over the grate, Echo in the firefighter's arms. It went viral online with a caption that read, "He never stopped waiting." And then he heard a cry. Michael's inbox filled with messages from around the country. Some were short, just a line or two. "Thank you for reminding me what loyalty looks like. I lost my dog last year. This made me cry and heal. Shadow is proof that love never really dies." Others were long, heartbreaking, and beautiful stories of dogs lost and found, of people holding on after impossible grief, of strangers who found hope in a Pitbull and a puppy beside a storm drain. Michael couldn't respond to them all, but he read every one. And then, one evening, sitting in the glow of the fireplace with Shadow asleep at his feet and Echo curled on his lap, he opened his laptop and wrote the blog post he'd been carrying in his heart for weeks. He titled it, "The Ones Who Wait." In it, he told the story not for attention, but because it deserved to be remembered. He wrote about Lily, about the way she gave without expecting anything in return, about the lavender scrap of cloth tied around Echo's neck, still tucked safely in a keepsake box on the mantel. He wrote about Shadow, how a dog refused to let grief harden him, how he waited not because he didn't understand loss, but because his love was too deep to walk away from. And he wrote about Echo, a soft spark in the middle of a cold night, a second chance no one expected. The post ended with a few lines that stayed with people long after they closed the page. Some love doesn't leave us. It changes shape. It becomes a glance at a closed door, a shadow in a hallway, a bark in the distance when it's raining and quiet. It waits for us in the familiar places, in the eyes of someone new, in the heart that refuses to forget. The blog went viral, shared across platforms, featured in articles, quoted by local news anchors. But Michael didn't care about the numbers. What mattered were the comments, from veterans who had lost service dogs, from widows who had buried their pets alongside their partners, from children who still set out old chew toys in case their best friend ever came back. One woman wrote, "I thought I was the only one who still sets a place at the table for my dog." Your story reminded me that love never looks foolish. Michael printed that one out and stuck it on the fridge. As the seasons changed and the tree's leaves turned to fire and gold, the little family kept walking their route. Shadow's steps slowed with age, and Echo grew stronger by the day. No longer the trembling puppy pulled from the dark. Sometimes, people would stop them in the park and ask if he was that dog, the one from the photo. Michael would smile, nod, and gently pat Shadow's side. "He's more than just a dog," he'd say. "He's the one who waited, and then chose to live again." On one crisp autumn morning, as the wind rustled the maple leaves, Michael sat on the bench alone for a moment, a notebook on his lap. He didn't write. He just looked at the two dogs lying side by side beneath the tree, one older, watchful, still, the other young, bright-eyed, ready to run. He smiled, then whispered to himself, as if speaking to Lily, "Some love never ends. It just waits in different places. Sometimes in a storm drain, sometimes in a puppy's eyes, sometimes in the quiet between two beating hearts." And with that, he closed the notebook and walked home with his family. Grief is just love with nowhere to go, Jamie Anderson once wrote. Here at Vale Marks, we believe love always finds a place, even if it takes the shape of a silent vigil beside a storm drain, or a new beginning wrapped in fur and trembling hope. If this story touched you, please leave a comment, share your thoughts, or tell us about a dog that changed your life. And don't forget to subscribe, help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers. Your support is more than a number. It's the fuel that inspires us to create meaningful, emotional, and healing stories like this one. Thank you for watching. We'll see you again with another story that leaves a mark.